Hey everybody, this is John here. Theology Prepping is the channel where we try to look at all things biblical and try to get us ready for the coming of Christ, for the Christian life, for the next day. We're doing that right now by reviewing a book, Precious Remedies Against Satan's Devices. We're just looking at it a couple chapters at a time, right now just one chapter at a time, because if we understand some of the devices Satan uses to come at us and the tactics and the look that sin presents itself with, then we're better able to prepare ourselves and keep ourselves prepared for what those attacks and assaults look like. So just like any kind of situation, preparing for a test, for school, for work, for military, if you know how something's going to come at you, if you know what the subject matter is about and you study to be prepared for it, well, then you should pass just fine. If you know how an enemy is going to attack you and you fortify that or you set up defenses against that, then you should be fine when those attacks happen. So in looking at this book, we're in chapter 3. And the author, Thomas Brooks, says one of the attacks, one of the devices Satan uses is by extenuating or lessening of a sin. So, oh, that's no big deal. Oh, that's just a little white lie. That's just a small sin. And it's not like you killed anybody. It's not like I, destroyed anybody. It's not like I went out and committed adultery or anything. And so by that we lessen sin. We lessen what we think the impact is to God and His Word. But He tells us that every sin, no matter how small, is that we've broken His law. We've broken His commandments. We've gone against Him. Remember, the law and the everything by which God judges Himself to be perfect and holy and righteous is a part of His character. So when we attack that by saying, well, that's fine for him, but for me, I'm going to do this, we're doing just like what Adam did in the garden. We're asserting ourselves over and above God, and that is sin. Scripture, we break any one piece of the law, any one commandment, no matter how small. We've, in a sense, broken the whole thing. Think about trust in a relationship. You catch somebody in a lie. Well, what does that do to the rest of the relationship? You trust them about anything else? What else are they lying about? And it brings everything down. So the solutions he gives us, Thomas Brooks says, sin which men account small bring God's great wrath on men. So God's punishment for sins, the consequences of sins, it's no small matter. It is still hell to break God's commands, to sin. Every sin, no matter how small we may think it is, deserves hell, deserves eternal punishment, because you've eternally offended an eternal God. So that's one. Second one, it says, the giving way to a lesser sin makes way for the committing of the greater. And we've seen this in many different things, and especially sins within society. When you see it's like some group and they want something done, you're like, well, that's not quite right. And it cracks the door open a little bit. And then something else, and it opened a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more. And next thing you know, it's like, oh my gosh, how did we get to this point that our country, our nation, our society, whatever, allows for these horrendous sins? Well, I bet it started with something so small and simple that it was like, whoa, this isn't a big thing, but it keeps pushing the door farther and farther open when we do these things. It says, it is sad to stand with God for a trifle. I think what he's getting at here in reading the book is that in some little thing, you're not willing to stand with God. I mean, you think of all the bold assertions we make as Christians sometimes about how we'll stand with God till the very end. And, I would never betray God. I would stand with him. But then in our daily lives, like probably an hour later, it's like, well, there's this little thing. Well, it's just a little thing. It's like, well, then why won't you stand against it if it is a little thing? In other words, if it's a little thing, it's not a little thing to entertain. It should be a little thing that's easy to squash, easy to get rid of, easy to push off. And yet it's those little things that we seem to have the hardest struggle with. The bigger temptations, the bigger things, oh, I was so angry, I would have killed this person or whatever. Oh, but I controlled my anger. But then we'll go call somebody's names, or or think badly about them, within our head and mind. Again, a sin isn't always just what we do, thought, word, and deed. We like to pin sins on the deed part, but our thoughts and our words, they give us away just as much. Do we go with anger sometimes when we shouldn't, and yet Scripture says, well, even in that anger we've committed murder. So the little thing should be a trifle, something easy to dismiss, not easy to entertain. Next one, he says, often there is most danger in the smallest sins. And we kind of talked about that. It seems small, but it keeps pushing the door. He made the point, pushing the door, the crack, a little bit more, a little bit more. So the saints have chosen to suffer greatly rather than commit the least sin. So in some circumstances, when you look back over the church, look at things that Christians have stood for adamantly, and they were willing to suffer for. Loss of life, loss of family, loss of jobs, loss of positions in society, what have you. Especially under great persecution in foreign lands and in olden times even. You get burned at the stake for certain things if you went against the established church and stuff like that. It's like, but we're willing to stand for those things, but we're going to let things, smaller things slide. It's like, no, don't do that. Don't slide on the little things. And then he says, the soul can never stand under the guilt and weight of sin when God sets it home upon the soul. So one of the remedies when you think about little sins is to really look at that sin and really think about its consequence and how it would snowball into something greater, and the displeasure that brings to God, and how it breaks his command. I mean, like, really break it down for yourself mentally and intellectually on that level. And so in its scope then, however small of a sin that is you're thinking about, or temptation that is, put that weight on it to say, wow, that isn't such a small thing after all. It is if I'm just like quickly considering it and not really weighing out all the stuff that comes with it. But kind of like some of the other things, when we start pulling all the strings attached to it, what all is this going to trigger? How is it going to affect me in whatever sin it is? How is it going to affect others? How is it going to look upon the church if it got out? And all these kinds of things. Pull all those strings intellectually for yourself, however small the sin is, and consider that cost. Consider the weight of everything you're pulling down, and can you withstand that avalanche? No. And what damage does it do to God? So in that sense, really weigh it out and figure out, wow, this is really bad. I need to avoid it, not entertain it. The last one he has as a tip for us, as a remedy to that device, it says, there is more evil in the least sin than in the greatest affliction. So let me read that again. There is more evil in the least sin than in the greatest affliction. To me, this harkens back to Romans chapter 8, where the slightest things, it's like our suffering compared to the eternal glory. There is no comparison. It's almost like the reverse of that. Well, if our suffering in this life doesn't compare to heaven, it's like, heaven's going to be so good. Our suffering now is like, I would have suffered that 1 billion times over for what heaven is like. Heaven is so glorious. I would have never exchanged this. Well, flip that around for sin. The weight and the terribleness, the horrorness of sin. Is that something you would entertain against your greatest affliction? It's like, wow, why would you bring down something like that? Again, think of the torture thing that Christians have gone through in the past. Why were they so willing to do that? because they went to the stake, they went to, whatever it was that happened to them, that they were standing firm, they were refusing sin, refusing heresy, they were willing to suffer because they saw how bad the evil was in that sin. Sometimes just sin, that's, church word, it kind of sounds bad, I shouldn't do that, it's a sin. We call it what it is, call it evil associated with Satan. And is that, wow, should I really then be doing that? Am I participating in the evil of Satan? Look at it in those kinds of extreme terms and say, wow, whose side am I on? And what am I entertaining if I do this? So that's our lesson for this week. Quick, I guess ran about 11 minutes or so. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. Really trying to keep things on this channel and my Humble Theology channel centered on just free Christian teaching. Not looking to do anything else really. I just like to teach and like to keep things going, stuff like that. But let's keep Christian teaching free as much as possible. It's a nice little portal. You can come on, just listen, add comments, add your thoughts, add questions. Those are things we can deal with and go over with and come up with some biblical solutions for. So again, thanks for watching. God bless. Take care. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.